Hey everybody, it's me. Just a quick little check-in since, well, I like doing them, and we won't actually see each other until after spring break, despite what folks in the TLC might have thought. But anyways, here we are in our course. I wanted to just, as I would maybe in a video, check-in of this kind in a regular class, kind of remind people of where we're at and where we're going. So right now, as we know, we're in Unit 3. We talked a little bit about, possible assessment devices. There's millions more that exist out there. The question that maybe we didn't quite get to in our class, but that really remains with us is not so much, where do we find one of these things, but which do we use? Do we develop our own? And kind of how do they exist institutionally? As part of the enrollment process, part of like a registration prereq, depending on what type of courses students are taking. And I think, as I'd mentioned in class, the takeaway really for us on a really practical level, at least for the immediate future, the near future, is that since COD really doesn't have, outside of these optional and not terribly great assessment tools for students, that it's really incumbent on you as the course designer and the faculty member, whether you're teaching online or still in the hybrid format, is to take on a little bit of that yourself as far as orienting students to the technology portion of your class, really making sure you walk them through certain kinds of things if you feel like they might not have the resources to do, things in Blackboard that you want them to do. One of the things, again, that I think is really useful that I recommend people add is this kind of peer support board, which can be a great way to defer some of those tech questions once students get used to using them. But really to be aware that you do become, despite your best efforts to have, Blackboard help resources available within your course, you really are going to become the point person for IT issues. So that's part of what we talked about. So really orientation, some of the IT stuff, that is, like it or not, going to fall to you as the faculty member, even though we looked at some of these things. And ultimately, hopefully, we can advocate for some better, maybe preliminary steps for students to, as Steve mentioned, so that they're making good choices about a learning environment that is going to fit their learning style. You can't probably bar students ultimately from taking a class for which, we can see from the get-go that they're really not going to have success in, whether it's something as simple as taking a class like a hybrid and not having access to a computer, thinking that they're going to work from work, which even if they had the time to do so, which they probably won't, are they going to be able to watch video, listen to audio, install software if that becomes necessary, whether that's like even something as simple as like an Adobe Flash or the Adobe Reader to read a PDF. If you don't have that kind of basic administrative rights over your computer, you're just not going to be successful. So basic things like that. And then, of course, part of that, I think, feeds into the online assignment for this week, asking you to reflect on really open-endedly an online experience of some kind that you've had. It could be within Blackboard or something really more professional, but since we use the web to do so many things, I think it's useful to open this up to thinking beyond just those professional applications. So do you use Amazon? Do you book travel online? Do you rent cars, do hotel type stuff, any of that kind of, the day-to-day activity that so many of us use the web for? What are those experiences like? And is there something we can take away from the design strategy of those interfaces, whether it's Amazon, Hotwire, Travelocity, Blackboard, whatever it happens to be, that can improve our own course design? And sometimes we learn from good examples, and sometimes we learn from very bad examples. So sometimes a negative experience, while not good in and of itself, can be really helpful for I guess, pointing us in right direction. So we learn something even from that negative experience. Of course, the thing to think about in terms of, let's say, a really positive experience with Amazon, which is seamless in many ways, is to think about the enormous resources behind putting the architecture of that web experience together. And clearly we can't duplicate that individually. Institutionally, probably not a realistic possibility. The things that we'd want our students doing are not necessarily just Amazon type things, but maybe there are some structural elements that we could take away from those positive web experiences that do feed into our course, or that we can build in without being, of course, tech experts or programmers of some kind, or having, you know, just the sheer capital to invest in that kind of experience. So the other thing that I wanted to show you that I've mentioned in class was something quite simple in terms of working with discussion boards and having students work in groups. Potentially as just something that you want to do, but as a good way to mitigate something that Kent brought up, this idea of, or the challenge we face of having discussion boards where we do really want to engage all the students, but we end up getting the same response over and over again. So maybe if the question you're asking is not really a discussion type question, it's really like a, does the student have knowledge of this, or can the student reflect on this? The discussion board is maybe not the ideal tool to reach that learning objective, to achieve that learning objective. But often putting students within discrete groups can help them to work in that discussion mode without feeling like it's the entire class, or you can develop different discussion questions for each group to look at. So I had mentioned that Blackboard, of course, comes with a group feature, and it's further down in this control panel menu. I don't have my screen big enough to show you right now, but I had mentioned that in using the groups, what you can end up with, and I just did a screenshot of an old class of mine that you can hopefully see here. Notice that Unit 5, short fiction, short fiction, short fiction, basically for this discussion board I had 4 separate groups set up. So you'll notice what this does to your gradebook. It makes it look horrible, honestly. And you can see the fragment of Unit 8 where we had another group set up. Well, I had about 4 of these different units that were group-based. So you can see what it does just to this piece of the discussion board, or the gradebook. You can imagine the entirety of the thing. It was really, really cumbersome to work with for me. And obviously you see all these blank spaces, meaning that this group of students, maybe I can even, yeah, I can, right, we're the group for this, but it lists every single, right, column here, and it looks like nobody's even participated, but of course the group is just listed further down. So it just creates this really cumbersome, ungainly gradebook. And the other thing that happens is that the total column, which I can't pull up right now, but you'll notice that in your gradebook, if you hover your mouse over the total column, it'll show what the total points are for your entire course. Once you do these group things, it adds all of those. Like if this is 100 points, it calculates the total not just as 100, but as 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100. So all of a sudden this total, it skyrockets beyond, of course, what your course is actually worth. If you look at the individual student names total, it's still the right amount because it just will calculate this one, not this one, not this one, not this one. So the grades that students got were calculated correctly, but it's not very convenient for you as the faculty member to try to be building a course that equals a certain number. I like 1,000 because it makes for easy math, where your total doesn't actually reflect what each individual student total is going to be out of. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, just avoid the group function altogether. And when you build your discussion boards, which I can just show you here, one of the things that you can choose to do, among other possibilities, is allowing members to create new threads. If you unclick that, what you can do is create the threads yourself that are specific to each group. So you list student names that you want to be in that group. So you have a little bit more control of it. Click that off so they can't create some, tangential thread. They can only click into those group names, and hopefully, obviously, they see their own name and click into that group, right? It makes for a much cleaner gradebook. And again, we'll violate FERPA by looking at ours. So you'll see that just about every one of our units, our discussion boards, just have the single discussion board. So even if we were to break into groups, I would simply create a thread with, let's say, Jim, Bev, and Julie in it, but just have this single column. It wouldn't all of a sudden create Unit 3, Unit 3, Unit 3, right? Multiplied it for a couple of units, that just gets really ridiculous. And the total looks nice because it's 1,000 here, but it's also 1,000 for each individual student. It shows this as a running total, but oops. Okay, so I've gone on at length about this then. Stop looking at each other's grades. You shouldn't be doing that. But that does give you a little, taste of what that whole gradebook thing looks like. And really, it sort of ties into our discussion in Unit 3 of user-friendly design, right? Which is part of what we're thinking about here. You want a user-friendly course for students, but it's got to be user-friendly for you too. It can't be all over the place and ungainly. Even this little cleanup of my course menu that I like to do, it just makes it a more user-friendly experience for me. As soon as a course is over, right, I'll go in and take it off the list. So I just have my spring 2014 courses listed. Just makes for a more efficient experience. Okay, I will see you all online, and if I don't, since I won't see you face to face, I hope everybody has a good spring break.